This year.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Good morning, everyone. I actually, I spoke at Breakfast and Learn recently, but what happened was half of the regulars ran away to Crete, so you had to make you do it again. We had to do some touch limit and catch up. Um, I wanted to start. There's a story about a man he's at the Wimbledon final on centre court. Very exciting. Obviously, I've never managed to beat. Has anyone been to centre court? Yes. Okay, well, I imagine it's amazing. I've always wanted to go. I've never been yet. But he's at the centre court Wimbledon final day, completely packed house. Everyone's very excited. There's a buzz in the air. But eventually, it's a packed house, but there's a chair next to him which is empty. And eventually, the people behind him sort of say to him, "I'm sorry to help," and they say, "I'm sorry to ask, but is that chair empty? Is anyone supposed to be coming with you?" And he said, "Well, yeah, that chair unfortunately, it belonged to my late wife, but unfortunately, she recently passed away." And they go, "I'm so sorry to hear. That's terrible. I'm so sorry." And they think for a second. They say, "But do you not have any friends or family, someone who would have wanted that seat, someone who could have come with you today?" And the man says, "Yeah, no, I've got loads, but they're all at the funeral." Lahavdil, with a big distinction, we find the opposite in this week's parsha. Because in this week's parsha, we have Abraham mourning over his wife Sarah, who passes away. And it's actually very beautiful. The Torah feels the need to tell us, we know the Torah doesn't waste words, but the Torah feels the need to tell us about Abraham's emotions. It's actually something I always find very interesting when the emotions of our leaders, whether it's the forefathers, whether it's Moshe, Aaron, when their emotions come up, it's always something to take a beat and take a hold of, because the Torah doesn't feel the need to tell us about emotions very often. But it tells us that when Sarah died, Abraham came and he gave her a hesped, he eulogized over her, and he wept. And it's just a short passage, but it tells us the emotion that he has. And then, as we'll go on to talk about in a bit, his next sort of move was to look at the practicalities of, right, what do I do next? How do I kind of ensure continuation, looking after my family? And before that, how do I ensure that Sarah has a proper burial and everything is fine? What's fascinating is when Abraham then approaches the Bnei Het, and he wants to find somewhere for Sarah to be buried, and he approaches the Bnei Het, children of Heth. He approaches them, and he says a very fascinating line. And really, what I want to talk about this morning is just look at this line, because I think it's absolutely fascinating. I think there's a huge amount to learn from it. He says to them, "Ger v'toshav anochi imachem," which means I am a stranger and a citizen amongst you, or I am an alien and a resident amongst you. And it's fascinating because this is really the first time we see Abraham in sort of recorded dialogue with the regular people of the land around him. We've seen him talk to kings, we've seen him talk to Pharaoh, to Avimelech, to the king of Stone, we've seen him talk to all these different leaders, but here he's coming to the regular people, what you'd say are his peers around him. And this is his kind of introduction as he's coming towards them. He says, Ger I am a stranger and I am a citizen amongst you. And that's how he sort of introduces himself. That's the line he brings. And I think it's an absolutely fascinating line for us to learn and to try and deduct and try and work out what's really going on here. Because really what we're seeing is Abraham's philosophy in a nutshell for how he deals with the world, how he views the world, how he sees the world around him. And what I want to suggest is sort of five different interpretations of what he's really saying here. And I think this is one of them where they could all possibly be true. Or if you want, you can choose your favorite. But you don't have to. I think they could all possibly have an element of truth and an element of emet in them. The first idea, first concept is literal. That Abraham is saying, I am a resident and an alien. I'm an alien and a resident amongst you. What's he saying? He came from a faraway land. He wasn't born here, as we know. That's how we're introduced to Abraham, or Avram at the time. Lech lecha me'artzecha. Go from your land, go from your place. Abraham has to leave his birthplace, he has to leave his family, he has to leave everything behind and go to this new place. And we're seeing this kind of powerful idea of Lech lecha, because at this point, Abraham has been living in the land of Canaan and someone may want to check my maths here, but I believe for 62 years. Abraham, on and off, he had to go to Egypt in that time, but he's been living in the land of Canaan for 62 years. And yet still, he doesn't see himself as a citizen. He sees himself as an immigrant, as someone who's moved in, as someone who was a stranger amongst them. He doesn't see himself. That's how he sees himself. And I think that hints to the multitude and the magnitude of the challenge that Abraham faced when he had this idea of Lech Lecha. When he had this concept of Lech Lecha, he had to go to a place where throughout his entire life, he would never really feel at home. That was part of the challenge. He would never feel fully that this was his place. He would always be seen as the ger. He would always be seen as the stranger, as the alien, as the immigrant coming in. And that's part of the challenge that he has. The second interpretation I want to bring is financial. Abraham resides in the land of Canaan, but he doesn't own any land. And this is a very interesting point. Rabbi Sachs picks up on this, and I think it's Rabbi Sachs' Yortzeit coming up, so it's appropriate we learn some of his Torah. And he picks up on this, and he says one of the most perplexing features and aspects of Abraham's story is the gap, the disconnect between the promises that Hashem makes and the reality that occurs to Abraham. There's a huge gap between them. And we see this throughout Abraham's life. Abraham is told, as we said, if we go back to Lech Lecha, he's told, if you listen to me and you go from your land and your birthplace and your father's house to this land I will show you, what will happen to you? You will become a great nation. You'll have many descendants. You'll become a great nation. And your name will become great, and this land that you go to, it will all belong to you. Those are the promises that Hashem has made to Abraham. And yet, if we look at Abraham's life, especially when he first gets to the land of Canaan, we feel a complete disconnect between those promises and the reality. First, when we talk about his name, throughout Abraham's entire life, he is constantly sort of balked, and there's constantly trouble, and he's constantly sort of going up against the people around him, whether it be the Midrash telling us that in his first land, Erechastim, he's thrown into the fiery furnace after being chased by Nimrod for years upon years, and then he's thrown into the fiery furnace. And then when he gets to the land, he has trouble with the natives. When he gets to Egypt, Sarah is kidnapped. For someone who's supposed to be this very well-respected, a man of great repute and a profound name, the reality doesn't seem to fit with that. He's told that he's going to be a great sort of a great nation, descendants are going to emanate from him, but he can't have children. Him and Sarah can't have children. Abraham doesn't have a child. He's about 87, and Abraham and Sarah don't have children until Abraham's 100. So we know that there's this disconnect between the reality. And then perhaps the most troubling of all, 7 times in the Torah, Hashem promises Abraham, this will be your land. This land will belong to you. Over and over again, Hashem makes that promise. And yet when Abraham's coming to the end of his life, and when Sarah's died, Abraham does not even have a plot of land as his own, of which he can bury Sarah. It's a huge disconnect between the reality. Hashem's promise his whole land will be yours. He doesn't own anything, not even a plot of land which he can bury Sarah. So we see here this massive gap between the reality and the promises. And Rabbi Sachs speaks about this, and he says that Abraham is teaching us a very important and profound lesson in faith. That faith is not based on certainty, says Rabbi Sachs. It's the courage to live with uncertainty. That's such a profound idea, that's what faith means. Not that you know everything, not that there's a complete 100% proof or knowledge or certainty, but it's the ability and the courage and the mental fortitude to say, we don't know what's going to happen, we don't know what's going to be, but we have this belief within us that there's a bigger plan, that Hashem, we are all living in Hashem's world, and that things are going to work out according to that plan. So one of the things we say every day in Tachnun, when we say, we don't know what's going to be, we don't know what's going to happen, but our eyes are towards you, Hashem. That's what faith is. It's that ability to say, we don't know what's going to happen. I remember one of my Rebbeim posted this when COVID first broke out, and there was a lot of fear, and we didn't know what was going to happen. And he said, we don't know what's going to be, but our eyes are upon you because we always have that faith as well. The third interpretation of this pasuk, is a spiritual idea. And I think this is something very, the idea that, what does it mean, I am an alien and a resident amongst you? As we said, this is Abraham talking to the Bnei Chet. This is Abraham talking to the people around him, the other residents of the land, who are not at this point, as we know, monotheists. So they are not theologically the same as Abraham. And this is what he says to them: I'm an alien, I'm a stranger, and I'm a citizen amongst you. And Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik brings a very powerful idea on this, that he effectively says this is the crux and the epitome of what it means to be modern Orthodox. We talk about this concept of modern Orthodoxy. This is exactly what it means. We are differentiated by our ideology. First and foremost, we are a stranger. But when it comes to the outside world, we're not afraid to say we have different values. We have different things which drives us. We have different priorities. We are driven by our Torah, and that's what guides us. And that's what we live to, and that's what we aspire to. And that's the main point of our life. And that differentiates us from those around. That makes us strangers. That makes us aliens. That makes us different from the people around us. But at the same time, but we are also citizens. We also want to be good, proactive citizens in the world who contribute to the world, who contribute to how we understand the world, how we view the world, and can make the world a better place. That's the sort of idea of what it means, I think, for our ideology, for what it means to be modern Orthodox. This idea of Ger Toshav, the two work together. Yes, we have a difference. Yes, we have our Torah, and we don't differentiate from that, and that is our guiding. But at the same time, let's be citizens. Let's be good parts of the world. Let's be good neighbors to the people around us. It's that those two things working in conjunction together that informs who we are. The fourth idea I wanted to bring on this is sort of, I've written it here as influential. And what I mean by that is how do we interact with the people around us? And for this, I think we have a really interesting model over the last couple of parashiot between Abraham and Lot. Abraham says the order in which he says it was very important because he says, Ger v'toshav. I am the stranger and I am the resident. That's the order in which he brings it. And we see when it comes to Lot and how he wants to interact with the world around him, he effectively thinks to himself, I'm going to dive in. I want to just get involved in the culture. He moves right into Sodom. He becomes part and embedded in their culture. And as we saw in last week's Parsha, it has a terrible effect on him. He loses his morality. He loses his sense of self, not completely, but he becomes very confused because he's just thrown himself in. And he would say it the other way, Toshav Beger. I'm not quite like you, but I want to be. I want to embed myself as much as possible. That's how Lot sees the world. Abraham, on the other hand, has a very important distinction because he puts the ger first. And he says, as we say, there has to be a recognition of what our priorities are in life. So Abraham treats everyone, and we see this, we know that Abraham's characteristic is chesed. Abraham treats everyone with a pure kindness. I think the best example of that is the beginning of last week's Sedra, in Vayera, when Abraham sprints to go and welcome 3 days after his bris milah as well. He sprints to go and welcome people into his home, and he's running around to get them the cow and to feed them and to get them nice food and to make sure they're comfortable. And he's doing everything he possibly can. At this point, he thinks they're idolaters. Abraham's whole life is dedicated to fighting idolatry. He thinks they're idolaters coming into his home, and rather than sort of treat them in any negative way, he treats them like kings. And we know he thinks they're idolaters because that's why he wants to wash their feet, so there's no dust, because dust is involved in idolatry. So we know that that's the case, and yet that's how he treats them. Abraham wants to welcome everyone into his home, no matter who they are, no matter their beliefs. But there's a very important difference between Lot, who moves into their place, who goes into where they are, and Abraham, who welcomes everyone into his place, into his home, with love, with kindness, with appreciation, and with care. Because what Abraham is saying is he puts the ger first. He's saying, yes, there's this differentiation. Yes, we have to be driven by our ideology, by our values. We have to be distinct, but we treat everyone with kindness. We treat everyone with care and love, but we do it in a way where we know what our values are. We become rooted in our home and our values, and then we invite everyone in. And we can be kind to everyone because we're confident that, unlike Lot, we won't be phased because we're rooted in our home and our values as well. There's an idea I always find very profound in Pirkei Avot of, to be like a lion raising its tail to its head, as opposed to, does anyone remember which other animal it was? Yeah, fox. Fox was it? Going its head to its tail, and the idea being that that's what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be raising and elevating the world around us up, rather than us lowering ourselves to the standards of the world around. And Abraham is the best example of that as well. The fifth idea I wanted to bring, and final idea, is based off a sort of, I don't know how to say it. It's a conversational style of a rabbi I used to go to a shir to in his shir in Yeshiva. And it's a rabbi called Rabbi Moti Berger, who is a rabbi at Aish, but he used to come to our kotel and do some shirim. And he had a very interesting conversational style, very interesting style of share. In this style of share, he would always ask you, are you more this or are you more this? And the answer would be both. He'd say, are you this or are you this? So he'd say, are you animal or are you human? The answer would be both. And then he'd say, which are you more? And that would always be a style of share. Are you human or are you divine? Are you mortal or are you divine? Are you child or are you adult? The answer would always be both. You'd always be more one than the other. So he'd say, are you child or are you adult? You're both, but you're more child because you've always been a child. Only recently you've become an adult. However old you are, the child is always there. That was his idea. And I think I wanted to use that sort of conversational mode and look at this idea of Ger Toshav again, that we have this idea of being a stranger and a resident, and now look at it from a more sort of macro spiritual idea and talk about this notion that now we're talking about our place in this world. Are we a stranger or are we a resident in this world? And the answer is both, Ger Toshav. But this is this sort of idea that Rob Soloveitchik, amongst others, talk about in Lowly Man of Faith and other places, that there's this element of Ger, there's this element of kind of strangeness, of distance from this world, because we know that ultimately our ultimate purpose is to serve Hashem, is to become part of a broader, bigger divine plan that goes beyond the limits of the physical world around us, goes beyond the limits of the time that we might have on earth. There's something much deeper to it as well. So that's something that we might feel that we're here on this earth and we want to contribute, we want to be part of it, we want to be part of the world around us. But at the same time, we have this notion that actually we're so much more and our potential is so much more. And like Abraham before us, we have the ability to have a huge impact that goes far beyond our lives. And like Sarah as well before us, that our impact can go so much beyond our lives and we can have a huge and profound impact beyond the physical parameters of time and space around us. And with that, wish everyone good morning.
Thank you very much.